Hi, everybody. Just letting everyone in. There's quite a few in today. Welcome. We'll get started in half a minute.
So precision.
Thanks for putting your camera on, Terry. Nice to see you.
Nice to see you too.
All right. Okay, a few more people probably jump on in a sec, but welcome everyone to our 15th Lunch and Learn for 2024. How exciting. We've got one more to go, so and then it's the end of the year and time flies. But we've certainly built a great momentum with our Lunch and Learns and today's all part of it. So today we have Simon Booth. He's the Director of AEGIS. And today he will be speaking to us about two things that AEGIS specialise in, and they specialise in people risk. And the two areas that they're going to talk about today is workers' compensation and psychosocial hazards. So I'm sure that's why everyone's on, because they are to
limited.
Yeah. They're important things facing our businesses. So without further ado, I will pass you to Simon Booth.
Right, I'll take over. Yes. There we go. We're on. So I'm going to move fast because we've got a lot that we want to get through today. I'm going to drop that down if I can. So slides. I guess what I want to do and what I try to do when I talk to people is challenge preconceptions about how they think about people risk, workers' compensation, risk safety. One of the things, so I used to be a psychologist. I was explaining this before. I woke up one day, realised that people annoy me, thought really bad career choice, need to do something else. And like a lot of people, drift into workers' compensation.
As you do.
As you do. What I've had the fortune to work across everything from occupational rehab, underwriting, claims management, account management, across a multitude of organisations. I've worked at some of the international brokers. And what I've worked out 10 years ago, 9 years ago when I started AEGIS, is everyone is doing it wrong. Right? And so don't feel on your own if your premiums are heading in the wrong direction. Don't feel on your own because most people are getting it wrong. And when I say that, if we look at what people consider to be the be-all and end-all of, and that would be great. Now, it was working before and now it's not working. Okay. There we go.
There we go.
What people have looked at as to be the be-all and end-all of workers' compensation, it was something that was developed in the 70s or 80s by a company called Richard Oliver International. And for almost 40 years later, we're still using the same approach. So I'm just doing this with people in the room, but who wants change? When we look at our workers' compensation people, we're still with people in the organisation, who wants change? Yeah, I see all those hands raising. So, but the tricky part is who wants to actually change. And as people, we are extremely resistant to change. Even those people who on the surface appear to really adapt well to change are not, there's still some anxiety and fear that goes on and some resistance. They just move through the process of change faster than the other people. So if we start looking at, run a little bit slow, sorry. What we know is historic approaches to workers' compensation have had minimal impact. Right? Employer premiums continue to rise, and the two largest schemes, being Victoria and New South Wales, are failing. Right? So what we know, if there was a great study done by OSS Intros a little while ago that looked at safety, actually looked at, when WorkSafe Victoria came in 1985 through to 2015 and what had happened. And we saw a marked decline in injuries and claims. So in 1985, we're having about 70,000 claims a year. it dropped rapidly down to about 26, 27,000 within about 10 years, right? So we were getting that piece right. And what they started to say is, with what's available, with technology that's out there, there's not a lot more that we can do. We've managed the slips, trips and falls. We've got all the guards on machines now. You know, when there's a big gaping hole, we fill it. When someone goes up on a roof, we harness them up and we put up safety barricades. And we're getting much better at that. There are still the rogues out there, but the predominant employers out there want to be safe because they don't want to go to jail and they don't want to be prosecuted. They don't want to have massive fines. And hopefully they also want to look after their team. Yep, right. Then what they're saying is now we can make incremental improvements. And this is where you start to look at automisation. So even you walk into any factory out there, and I went to a great Australia Post distribution centre up in Queensland, and they have robot forklifts, right? They have robot forklifts. They have these conveyor belts where all the parcels flow and they're going that way, but the conveyor belt also shoots that way, so it flies them off in all these bins. There were still 150 people working. So regardless of automisation, we still have people in these environments. So we are doing things to make it safe, but the cost to do it and the size what you have to do now to make those little changes is quite large. So what we look at is, and this is Alex Colley. So Alex Colley is from Monash Uni. He does a lot of research in this space. He actually said that while we are becoming much better at preventing injury, we are no better at helping people get back to work. So he looked at 15 years of claims, and he identified that at a year, at the start of that period, we got 75% of people back to work by a year. 15 years later, we were still only getting 75% of people back to work at the end of a year. More importantly, though, we're actually getting worse. So we're still only getting 75% of people back to work at the end of a year, but it's actually costing, taking us 67% longer to do it, and it's costing us 109% more to do it. So if we look at between 2000, 2001 and 2009 and 2020, we're actually gotten worse at getting the same result. And if we look at it, we start to look at, well, what's happened in the risk profile. So we've actually, again, we've gotten better at risk. Yeah, 2001, it was 9.4 claims per million hours work. It's dropped down to 6.5 claims per million hours. So it just takes a little bit of a lag here to go through. Computer, keep up. What we've got now, we know that we've actually decreased fatalities by 50% since 2006, 2007. Now, let's face it, one fatality is too many, but we are getting much better at that, right? And we've gone from 5.5 fatalities per 100,000 workers to 1.4 fatalities per 1,000 workers in about 30 years. So we are getting much better on that safety side. But let's have a look at Victoria and New South Wales. So the latest figures have just come out. New South Wales made a $2.8 billion underwriting loss, and Victoria made a $1.3 billion underwriting loss. Right? So they're bringing in, and that's after Victoria jacked the rate 2 years ago by 40% on average across all businesses. They are still not bringing in enough money to cover the claim side. Right? So I am moving quickly because I've only got the 40 minutes to get through them. So what we also know is there's been a big increase in mental injury claims. All right. So if we look at Victoria, in 2011, 2012, mental injury claims made up 10% of all new claims. The latest data which just came out, they now make up 18% of all new claims. All right. If we look nationally, 9% of all new claims, based on the last national data, are mental injury claims. So here's my question. Is it twice as stressful to work in Victoria as it is anywhere else?
There's no question.
That's your question. And the answer is no. In fact, if you take Victoria out of that national data, nationally we're about 6%. So is it 3 times more stressful to work in Victoria? It's not. And this is where, when we look at Victoria and New South Wales, and we throw Queensland and we throw South Australia in amongst that as well, they're what are called funded schemes. So they're actually funded by the government. So the nominal insurer is the state. And what that means is politics comes into play a lot in those states, and they make a lot of changes, not because it's for the good of the scheme, but because it's a political football. So we go back to January 1, 2018 in New South Wales. ICARE made this amazing decision to only have one agent. So they went from 6, I think it was, or 7, down to 1 overnight. They tried, South Australia tried the same thing about 10 years before and it had failed. So we don't know why they decided it was going to. Their average return to work rates plummeted by 25% across all measures, and they're still not recovered. And last year they made the decision to bring pretty much all the agents back in. So we had 6 years where they made this decision to go back to what it was before because they said it wasn't working. But why did they make the decision to do it in the first place? There was actually no rationale provided as to why they would do it. They ran a big campaign at the time talking about improving the customer satisfaction. What we worked out after the change is the employer was not the customer. Right? The customer was the worker, and all they were focused on was making the workers happy. And there's a great graph, and I wish I'd taken a snapshot of it, and I didn't. It showed injured worker satisfaction over the 5 years went like that. Unfortunately, return to work outcomes went like that at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
So they were being off for longer because no one was pushing them, and they were really happy because no one bothered them. Right? Victoria, we had the Ombudsman's reports in 2016 and 2019 that were statistically unsound, but again, very political. She was out there. She was on four corners when I was. I spent about half an hour actually breaking down the stats to Adele Ferguson as to why the Ombudsman's report was invalid. That didn't air because it didn't fit with Adele's narrative. But what happened after the Ombudsman's reports is WorkSafe made a complete 180, stopped doing anything adverse to workers, and we were then surprised that claims expenses in Victoria went from about 2.5 billion to over 4 billion to 6 billion in the space of 3 years, because we were now not using the stick to actually push workers back to work at a claims level. Right. So, again, mental injury claims, what we know with them is from 2017-18, 52% of people were back at work after 6 months. That plummeted to 42% and 22-23 and has stayed there this year. So, we're getting worse again at getting people with mental injury claims back to work. That's just a graph showing that. Skip through that. All right, so 2 issues. So I'm moving quick. So with 2 issues, we need to reduce the number of claims. And, what I'd say to people is, there's that what was meant to be the zero harm philosophy, which unfortunately, when you look at the likes of Lynn Fox, Toll, they made it a target. We should have zero claims. I've got a client, I argue with him all the time. He says we should be able to have zero claims. And there's one really important reason as to why most businesses will never have zero claims. They've got people. Right. Same reason anyone travelled down the Calder Highway in the last 2 years, you'll see a big billboard up there towards zero fatalities on the road. And the same reason that we will always have fatalities on the road in our lifetime is the same reason we'll always have injuries in the workplace, because of idiots. And when I say idiots, we are all those idiots. We've all been distracted on the road. Just luckily we didn't hit anything. Right? We've all been a bit tired on the road and maybe not had the nap that we should have. Same in the workplace. You have people cutting corners, rocking up a bit fatigued, trying to rush, not paying attention. That will always lead to injuries. So no matter how safe you believe your workplace is, that you introduce a person to it, and that can stuff things up. And you can have a process that is completely ergonomic. But if the person doing it doesn't do it in an ergonomic manner, then that's going to change that. I use this story all the time. My father was a labourer. I used to go up and help him out on weekends. And one day, on one weekend, we spent 3 days levelling out topsoil in 40-degree heat. So on day one, I was doing I was stepping quite nicely. I was making sure that it was great. After about an hour, I'm just like, I got this, just want to get it done. Halfway through day 2, what do? I do my back. Right. So could that job have been done without me being injured? Yes, I demonstrated that for a day and a half. But because I got bored, because I wanted it done quickly, because it was 40 degrees, and when you've actually got the dust on your head and it's sweating, so it's running with, that's what I was dealing with. So how many of your people are working in environments where, okay, I get hot, I get cold, so I want to do things quicker to get through it? I visited a kangaroo processor in Orroroo, South Australia once, and it gets so cold there in winter that the delivery drivers go and stand in the freezer to warm up.
Wow.
Right? So you can understand that people working in these,
That's a risk.
Yeah, that motivates people to take shortcuts, get done quicker. So the other thing we need to do is improve our return to work outcomes. And what we generally see people doing is they'll go, well, I'll run a thing and I'll notice that I've got all these, I have back injuries in this section. Now, that's great. Go and look at that. Go and look at your economics. But I'll guarantee you that that's not going to make a massive difference because you're still going to get the person to comply with the economics. That's going to be this. Then if we go, oh, well, we had this person injured and it wasn't a very bad injury, but they never returned to work. Well, why is that? Again, comes back to people. What's their motivation? If someone didn't want to be at work in the first place, don't like their job, and now they're injured and they have a valid reason to stay off, it is harder to get them back. So that's why we have to take things away from just looking at safety and look at how the person engages in your environment and how you manage that process. And we have to step away from just looking at the injury and look at what's the person's motivation. Are they a good employee or a bad employee? Do they want to be here? How much annual leave and sick leave have they used up? Because if they've used it all up, that's a good indicator that they don't want to be there, right? And we manage the person. And we've had a guy, he fell 11 metres out of a boom lift. He hadn't harnessed himself in. He ended up in hospital for 6 to 9 months, broken every bone in his body, punctured both lungs, almost died. Within 12 to 18 months after being released from hospital, he'd done his rehab and he was back roofing. Yet I've seen a person with a cut finger never return to work. Right, so that it's worker motivation and that the way we engage those people at that point in time is extremely important. So what we look at is this: people risk. Now, people risk, if we take the fancy definition, is the risk of loss due to the decisions and non-decisions of people inside and outside the organisation. Let's make that a little easier. The risk to your organisation based on what your employees do or don't do. Right, so they might know the process, but they don't follow it. They might be a 2-person lift, they don't do it, right? The other side is it's the risk based on what you allow your employees to do. So who should be monitoring your employees to ensure they're doing the right thing? Team leaders, supervisors. But a lot of the time we promote the team leader or the supervisor based on the fact they were good at their job, not because they were good at people. No, and that is still the mistake that we make in Australia a lot. We go into places and the person managing people doesn't want to manage them. They thought they did, but they like building widgets, right? And they'd rather go back and build widgets, but they don't want to admit they failed and they don't want to take the 20 grand pay cut that they got to go into that role. So they end up not dealing with people issues, not confronting people who aren't performing, not confronting people who are working unsafely, end up with a very toxic team that implodes, production goes down because we put the wrong person in charge. So the model that we identified, and there's a new bar on this now that we haven't had a chance to add, which is psychological safety, which sits under workplace safety. What we know is we want to be safe. It's the foundation that we should build everything on. But when you're looking to drive down workers' compensation costs, what you have to look is past just safety. So I say all the time, people get focused on it, they don't think there's anything else you can do. To actually control people risk, what do you have? What do most places have in there already in place? Policies and procedures, right? And policies and procedures at their essence tell us, or the policy tells us, what is good and what is bad. Right? The procedure tells us what to do when the person is bad, right? But if we don't have them in place or we don't have good policies and procedures in place, we can't use them to manage that risk that people provide us, right? On top of that, the way the law works these days is you have to make sure people know your policy. The old days of it's on the shelf in HR or it's on the intranet or we've posted them up in the kitchen doesn't work. You have to actually be pushing those policies out continuously to ensure that people know. And when I talk these policies, everyone goes, "Oh yeah, we've got a safety one, we've got our PEP sort of stuff, we've got all that sort of stuff." But I'm talking code of conduct, I'm talking performance management, I'm talking social media, I'm talking bullying and harassment, I'm talking if you're someone in transport, I'm talking safe driving. Any policy that you want to rely on to performance manage or terminate someone needs to be rock solid. Your process about how you go through that needs to be rock solid. Because in every state, when we look at a mental injury claim, one of our only defence in most states is what's called reasonable management action. And so we have to have policies that are reasonable. We have to show that we followed the policy and that we followed the policy to, in a reasonable way. And if we've done that, then we actually have a chance to dispute a claim based on reasonable management action. But if your policy isn't reasonable, then how can your approach have been reasonable? If your policy is reasonable but you didn't follow it, by your own actions, you're saying you didn't follow something that was reasonable. So all these things kick into place. Then we look at the concept of recruitment. People just go, I need a bum and I need to put on a seat. And especially when we came out of COVID, we had a lot of talks with our clients. So I've just got to hire someone. I need someone in that truck. I need someone on the floor. I need this to happen. But what we talk about is recruitment as a risk assessment. When you're hiring someone, you need to understand the risks. So Alex is one of my business partners, but when we brought him on, I think he's probably the best at what he does in Australia, but he still has some risk attached to him. It's a very small risk, and it was a risk that we're prepared to accept. But you need to understand that. So even if you go through a period where you have to hire a lot of people, do your risk assessment so you understand those ones that are a risk that you wouldn't normally have accepted. And then when things slow down, you don't do last on, first off. You go and look at the ones that are the greatest risk, and they're the ones that you lay off. Right? So if we take it from a risk assessment, because we're bringing risk into our business, we need to understand it. And then probation. A lot of companies don't use it. Probation is your get out of jail free card. The words, you are not a fit for the organisation, are all you need to say to let someone go during probation. One day after probation, it gets a hell of a lot harder. So probation becomes our risk check. We did this risk assessment. Did we get it right? And if we didn't get it right, or if we've got concerns when we're getting close to that 6 months, we don't do which we get a lot from our clients. Oh, we thought we could get them there. We de-risk our business. We get rid of them. Because chances are, if after 6 months they are not there, if they're exhibiting behaviours that you are concerned about, if they told you they had skills and they haven't been able to demonstrate those skills, how is another month going to change that? All it's going to do is make it a lot harder for you to get rid of that risk in your business. Then we look at management. And I said before, that's probably the biggest issue in Australia today is we put the wrong people in management positions. Because at OH&S or WHS level, every organisation has an obligation to monitor the health and wellbeing of their employees. So who is the person on the ground who should be doing that? The supervisor, the team leader, right? But is that what they're focused on? Or are they focused on getting as many widgets out the door that day as they can? So if we don't put people into those roles who can actually understand people, who have high emotional intelligence, so they can see when something's wrong with someone, or more importantly, they can communicate in different styles to different people to get the best out of them, then we're not going to have the most functional team yet. Right? And I'll talk a bit more about that when we go into psych hazards in a minute. But if we don't get our managers right, then we're going to have issues. And when we go and look at a lot of claims, we can bring it back probably 80% of the time to a failure of line management. We knew that, we knew he was going to get hurt. He's been doing it that way for 6 months. Didn't anyone think of going and talking to him and telling him to do it differently? Oh, no. Oh, yeah, those two have been squabbling for 2 years. Okay, and we're now surprised that one of them's punched the other one and we've got 2 claims on our hands. So all these things that we go and when we look at a claim, when we come back and go, well, how did that happen? Usually it's happened because somewhere along the way a manager has failed to do their job. They haven't observed what's going on. They haven't stopped people doing risky things. We hear stories of people who have taken guards off machines. We've got a guy who got an arm pulled off in a machine and the company knew about it. Why didn't you do something about it, right? So that's where we see a lot of failure. If we get that right, it's actually going to improve a lot of things. Then just quickly, when we do have an injury, how we engage with that worker is important. Often what happens at that point in time is the first person to call the worker is someone from HR return to work that they've never seen or never met, right? So what do they feel? They feel engaged with the company. They feel a little bit abandoned. And there's some good stats out there. An iCare study that came in and showed that if your manager, your direct manager calls you within 48 hours after you're reporting an injury, it increases return to work outcomes by 400%. Wow. So that's massive because what we're doing is keeping that person engaged with us. And that engagement is the key. The minute that person feels disengaged from the organisation, the harder it is to get them back. And there's a good study done by WorkSafe Victoria, and there was a national one that matched it up. If someone is off for 45 days, not long, month and a half, their chance of return to work is 50%. And that's not return to work with you, that is return to work ever. So you can toss a coin at that point in time, and that'll determine whether they're coming back. So you can understand if we don't engage them, if we don't find duties for them, then they're more likely to be off for longer, they're more likely to be disengaged, And if you're in pain and you're sitting at home by yourself, what are you thinking about? How much pain am I? Aren't you? You get focused on that. Yeah. And then the insurer sends you to a doctor. You go to your own doctor once a month. You go to your physio. And what are you telling them every time you're there? How sick, how injured, how sore I am. So it sort of starts with that philosophy that I've got to go to tell these people I must really be sick if this has happened. Yeah. So we need to break that by getting people back to work. And we know that if people are in the workplace, they actually recover quicker and their symptoms actually subside a lot quicker through it. Okay, so probably the other thing that we get people to look at is what we call emerging risks. In the people risk space, what we're often doing is playing defence. We're being reactive to something. It's happened. Oh, my God, what are we going to do now? Oh, there's a claim. What are we going to do? With our clients, what we do is a call or a meeting once a month where we have HR, payroll, safety, all the ops managers, people who have the information, sitting together saying, what's bubbling away? What's about to erupt in this organisation? Because what we know about emerging risks is they can bubble along for a long time, but when they go quick. So if you haven't already been dealing with it, once it goes, it's too late. So actually sitting around talking about, we're about to performance manage someone. Okay, stop. Make sure HR is involved in that from day one, so the manager doesn't do something before the process starts that is deemed unreasonable, which gets the claim accepted. Someone's telling us they've got a bit of a niggle. It's not an injury, but we're like, okay, well, why don't we reduce their duties for a week, get them off to a physio before we actually end up with an injury in a claim? Yeah? So turning it around and being proactive. And there's, we have a lot of examples where people go, what about this? And we are able to actually stop a claim or mitigate the impact of the claim when it comes through. And that should be the aim by getting out in front of it. Okay. All right, how am I done? Look at that, 20 minutes to go.
Great.
So let's talk psychosocial hazards.
You got a question?
I think Greg just said, are you saying you should throw people into a volcano?
Not if there's witnesses, because it would be a work-related fatality and you might get prosecuted. Yeah.
Thanks, Greg.
So psychosocial hazards have always been around, right? And if you go back and look at every safety legislation that's in existence at the moment, it's actually mentioned. Inside there, it actually talks about psychological safety. But for some reason, even the regulators have ignored it for 30 years. But now they've gone, oh, well, we need to start focusing on it. And we need to start focusing on it because I think, we know that mental injury claims are on the rise. We know that mental health in general, we were a bit more open to the fact that you're allowed to not be well. So we look at that, and we look at things like, you remember, Brodie's Law, which came in place after the young girl was bullied in the cafe van and committed suicide. At that point in time, the judge could not issue jail time. It was only a financial penalty that could be applied. Brodie's Law came in place, it was about 15 years ago now, to bring in jail time for those offences. They've now gone, well, that should have just been part of safety anyway. And by looking at that, they go, oh, hell, it's already in there. So now what we're seeing is a focus nationally on psychosocial hazards. If we look at the court system here in Victoria, the Coroner's Court was actually fined $380,000 for breaches of psychological safety. Right? The Defence Department, the Army, has actually been charged, not prosecuted yet, but charged with breaches of psychological safety related to remote and isolated workforce. We know that New South Wales, Safe Work New South Wales, is doing a blitz of all medium to large organisations and looking at what are you doing about psychosocial hazards. We know that the Return to Work Inspectorate, whenever they're called out now and it's got something to do with mental injury, we'll be looking at what are you doing around psychosocial hazards. So it is on the people's focus, and they will be prosecuting more. So that is the very long-winded definition of what a psychosocial hazard is. Have a quick read of that, and I'll ask you a question. So someone tell me what a psychosocial hazard is. So this is what employers are dealing with. How can you not understand that? Why haven't you done anything about it? Right? So what we did, and again, I was talking before about how we were lucky enough to get some time with a linguist a year ago, and we were talking about this conundrum. How do we ask this question? If you're going to talk to someone and say, we want to understand what the psychosocial hazard is, what's the question? Because, what do you get? Normally when you talk psychosocial hazard, you end up hearing trauma, bullying and harassment, maybe overload. I'm overworked. Right? They're the things that generally pop out. But, so they're the 14 hazards. There's my little thing here. Sorry, let's go back. So I've done this in a different order than I thought. So they're the 14 hazards that Safe Work Australia identified back in 2019. There's now been 3 more added. One is covert surveillance of people. So are we logging key stuff? The fear of that. Fatigue is another one, and job insecurity. So they're 3 they're not in the Safe Work stuff, but Comcare's published them recently in that space. So your obligations, when we look at psychosocial hazards or psychological safety, your obligations are exactly the same as they are with addressing any other hazard. So most of you, if you've done any safety work, you'd have seen this disc. Step 1, you have to identify the hazards. Bit hard to actually deal with them if you don't know what they are. Step 2 is you have to assess the risk of those hazards. So how do we do that from a psychosocial perspective? Now, if 1 is not not a great risk and 5 is a great risk, 5 we're pretty much saying that it's suicide, isn't it? We're actually saying that someone's going to. 1, what is that? I'm a little bit cheesed off with my employer and I'm going to half-ass it through to the weekend and maybe work better next week. And 3 is that turnover. So we actually don't have the answer to that at the moment, and no one does. We've developed a tool with Deakin University, and that's one of the things they're researching this year is, well, what is the consequence of these hazards? So one of your overarching obligations is to consult your workers, right? So you have to ask them. And as I said, if we ask the question, what psychosocial hazards you got, you're not going to get much. But what if we ask people about what stresses you? What stresses you at work? We understand that a bit more, don't we? Or if we go a bit cruder, what pisses you off? What are the things about your job that piss you off? Well, this guy gets paid more than me and he's useless. My manager's a bozo. It's too hot in here. I work alone at night and I'm scared that someone's going to come in and rob the place. So when you break it down to this, it's pretty much the stuff that you go home and bitch to your friends and your family and about is what are the psychosocial hazards. Does that make sense? Yeah. There are things like environment, those things which are easier to focus in on, but things like low job control. Does anyone even know what low job control was until Safe Work Australia came out and said, if people don't have control over their job and what they do on a daily basis, it can actually cause stress. Right? So I do a lot of work in the meat industry. I'll tell you that no one on the floor has any job control. It is the thing comes past, you do this, it goes to the next person, they do this, it goes to the next person. What they are doing is already predetermined. In our office complex, we have on 2 floors a call centre. How much job control do they have? Right, so they just flow through. The phone just rings. They ask the same question. Go through that little tree, answer tree to try and get someone to buy what they're selling. Right. So one of the things that they're saying is, at a minimum, you should be using some form of survey. The only validated survey out there in Australia at the moment is People at Work. It's free. It's a bit clunky, and it's only in English. And it only actually identifies 10 of the 14 hazards that have been identified. So here we go. Shameless self-promotion. So we've worked with Deakin University over the last 18 months now, Alex, to develop a purpose-built tool to measure all the 14 hazards. From what we know, and this is according to Deakin House, is probably the leader in Australia, almost world leading based on what we're doing. The other thing that we've done, though, is we're not just using a survey. So most people out there at the moment are just do a survey. The problem with doing a survey is what's called transitory events. If we've actually got a few clients doing their EBA at the moment, right, and those negotiations are not going well. So everyone in that company is pissed off. So if we did a survey of that organisation, are we going to get a true representation, or are we going to get how people feel today because they're pissed off the EBA negotiation? So when you've got transitory events, what we say is, depending on how big it was, you probably need to wait 3, 6 or 9 months after that event to get an accurate picture of the business. But what should we be collecting that we can use that gives us a good picture? That's hard data. So what we do as part of our assessment is actually go and look at hard data. And it's great to see that when you have ideas and people catch up. Most of the regulated websites now actually say, hey, you should be looking at annual leave, sick leave accruals. You should be looking at turnover, absenteeism. You should review EAP data, grievances, incident reports, all the stuff that we're doing. So because what that gives you is a bit more of a solid measure of over time, what are we seeing, not what do we see if we talk to someone today. Right. The other thing that we've done is already translated into, I think, 10 languages. And we're translating more as well because we are a multicultural country. Right? If we want to make sure that people are understanding, we need to make sure it's in a language that they can actually respond to. Our tool takes about our survey takes about 5 to 10 minutes to do, so it's not bad. And that's the other thing we know in this day and age, everyone's got survey fatigue. So you've got to, if you're sending out 100 surveys, are you going to pop a survey right in the middle of it? No, you're probably going to give it some space and let people actually respond and put some effort into it. All right, let's keep going. So our other obligation is to observe the work and behaviours of our workers, right? Who's responsible for this? We go back to our managers. And what we see a lot is, and we talk about that manager who doesn't have the people skills, if someone is coming in and they're showing signs of psychological decline, most people don't want to know, do they? Now, what have we been trained? We've been trained since birth. When you see someone, you say, hi, how are you? And Baxter, you've been programmed to say,
yeah, not bad. How are
not
you?
bad, yeah, right. Because now I don't really care, and you don't really want to tell me.
Yeah.
Right? That's how we actually operate. But we have this one amazing day in the year called Are You OK Day, where we apparently care. As a former psychologist, I think it was the worst thing ever invented, right? Because we should care every day. But more importantly, as a manager, I should be observing my team and watching those subtle changes. Because someone doesn't go from here to having a nervous breakdown in a day. What our managers need to be doing is looking at, well, is Simon normally clean shaven? Yes, he is. Well, okay, I've noticed that he hasn't shaved in 2 weeks. Does he normally wear clean clothes? Yes, he does. I've noticed that he's wearing the same clothes a few days in a row. They're crumpled. These are those subtle signs. He's a bit more irritable. He seems tired. All these subtle things that come into play over time. We go, okay, I might need to have a chat. Okay, how are you going? You just don't see yourself. And that's where you might find out, I split from the missus. All these, a lot of these things have happened, right? Or, do you know what? I actually thought I've been bullied in the workplace. I didn't know what to say. I dread coming into work, right? So all these things, that unless you actually have a chat with the person, how are you going to find out? And the solution is not, here's the EAP card, I'm done. Yeah, that might be part of the process. Look, yeah, I'm here to support you. We'll go through this. Just want to let you know we do have an EAP program that's available, and I encourage you to take part of that. However, we will look at what we can do to support you. No. And this is the bit where a lot of our managers won't want to have those conversations, so we need to empower them and teach them. There's a good study that came out this year that actually identified that managers have a greater impact on a worker's mental health than their therapist or doctor. They have the same impact on your mental health as your partner. Now, I love my wife, but when she's having a bad day, I am having a bad day, right? And I'm sure when I'm having a bad day, she's having a bad day. But if you think about how much of an impact your partner has on you, that is how much impact your manager has. Then we talked about this before. You've got to look at what information have you got
2 minutes.
Yep. What information have you got that you can actually look at to help you? And that is that hard data I talked about before. That can actually give you some insight to what's going on. We've found some organisations, so target absenteeism should be about 10%. Last year in Australia it was 14%, right? But turnover, we've had some kinds of turnover at 30%. Your absenteeism rate should be 1.5. That is about 4 days a week. Not saying some people won't have more if they get the flu or whatever, but 4 days. We've had some coming in at 10. Right, 4% is considered bad. All right, so this is stuff you can look at that'll give you an indication of what's going on in your organisation. When it comes to assessing risk, don't complicate it. We've got a lot of people out there making it look fancy. That is a risk matrix. We've used risk matrix for over 30 years. Why do it differently? Put it in a format back to your organisation that they already understand. All right. And when you're looking at risk, you've got to look at duration, frequency, and severity. How long are they exposed to it, how often, and how severe. All right. Also, need to look at what happens when hazards collide. If I am working in a remote and isolated role and I'm being bullied, it's going to be worse than if I'm just being bullied or if I'm just in remote play. And that's something that is hard to actually understand. Final message before I finish up is when you're looking at what to do, we often sit there and go, oh, we'll pay people, that'll solve the problem, we'll do all these things. We'll have a table tennis table, we'll put fruit on the table for people. All those things are not going to make people satisfied. Being a bit of a geek, this is Hertzberg's two-factor model. And what he said was, it's not about if someone's dissatisfied or satisfied. There are two things you got to look at. There's, am I dissatisfied or am I not dissatisfied? Am I satisfied or not satisfied? The dissatisfied, not dissatisfied is things like pay, fruit on the table, jeans on Fridays, that sort of stuff. I don't want you to be dissatisfied, but at the end of the day, even if you're not dissatisfied, if you're not satisfied, you're probably still there. Satisfaction, that's about recognition, achievement, being able to move through an organisation, feeling valued, those sort of things. So what you need to be working on is satisfaction and no dissatisfaction, and that's how you actually decrease turnover and create a psychologically safe and well workplace. And there we go. So I did go very quick. I do apologise, guys.
Wow. So I have yet to find the. Yeah. So Greg said that's one confusing slide.
Which one? Oh, that one. Yeah. It takes a lot of. If Greg, give me a call. I'll take you through it in detail.
So has anyone got any questions? That was a lot of information crammed in to the 40 minutes. If you have, write it in the chat.
Is everyone still awake?
Yep.
That's my main goal.
Yes, awake.
Greg did ask a question. Is it really possible or desirable to protect people from the stresses of life? Or is it too late to ask this question as it's already legislated?
Look, we have to protect them from the stresses of work. We have to support them with the stresses of life. And that's the difference. That what we should be trying to do is have an environment at work that doesn't add to someone's stress. And what we look at if we take it from a workers' compensation perspective, if I have a mental health issue or I'm depressed, anxious, stressed, and I come to work and work makes it worse, I am now on the hook for a work-related injury due to aggravation. So yes, we should be. We can't control what goes on in their life. But what we should be doing is everything we can in the workplace to ensure that we don't make it worse.
Sure.
It touches on your hazards colliding as well, right? Like that's the same hazard and work hazard.
And I won't go into, but one of the emerging risks, probably one of the best outcomes we got was there was a lot going on in this person's home life that was horrible. And we did a lot of stuff in the workplace to actually help them with that, not in a direct manner, that actually enabled them to move through it. So
That's
pretty cool. Shannon said yes, she's still awake. No questions, but she does have questions she's going to take back to people and culture team. It's very cool. Thanks, Shannon. That's good. Any others just quickly? It's right on time.
I've got Alex's...
Greg's just
he's been cheeky
twisting things. Yeah. Did you just make that up? Protect from stresses of work and support from stresses of life.
That did just come to me as we were talking. Yes, you are correct. I like to think I work well on my feet. You got Alex's details on the screen. One of the things that we offer for all the members is a free review of your workers' compensation program. So if anyone's interested, reach out to Alex and he'll take care of you. We do a lot of training. And we have a lot of content on LinkedIn. So if you want to not have to put up another 45 minutes on me, but they are little 2-3 bursts. If you follow AEGIS RMS on LinkedIn, there's a lot of content that we pump through.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.
For today. Do you want to take that off share? We just going to put up our slide for next week, actually, and this is our last for the year, number 16. We are going to hear from Nick McClanahan. She owns a company called Human Experience, and the question is why service is so important. And Nick owns a mystery shopping business that helps franchises, work on where their business is at, what's working, what's not working. So interesting stuff next week as well. So I look forward to seeing you all next Tuesday, 10th of December. Thank you.
Everyone.
See you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.